A man alone in a dark room. His hands tremble. He hasn't eaten in 3 days. He talks to pigeons. He counts his steps. He touches the doorknob 3 times before entering. His enemies call him insane. The press has forgotten him. He died poor, isolated, completely alone in a New York hotel. His name was Nikola Tesla. And he changed the world more profoundly than almost any human being in history. This is the story of how the most brutal isolation forged the mind that electrified civilization. Of how extreme loneliness, that very condition that destroys most men, became the crucible where the future was cast. Because to understand Tesla, to truly comprehend what it means to survive isolation and transform it into genius, we must first understand the world he inherited. A world plunged into its own form of darkness. Imagine that world. The 19th century. Not the ordinary darkness of closing your eyes, but the absolute darkness that fell upon humanity each night like a divine sentence. When the sun sank below the horizon, entire civilization retreated. Cities became labyrinths of shadows where danger lurked in every nameless corner. Factories stopped their machines. Children stopped playing. Families huddled around trembling candles that cost a week's wages, watching the wax melt like time itself, drop by drop, hour by hour, until only blackness and silence remained. It was the age of the Industrial Revolution, they said. The age of progress. But every night, that progress ground to a halt. Trains that had conquered continents stood motionless at stations. Telegraphs that connected oceans fell silent. Night was the great equalizer, the primitive reminder that despite all our advances, we remained vulnerable creatures, afraid of the dark like our ancestors in caves. The streets of London, Paris, New York, cities that proclaimed themselves capitals of the modern world, emptied at dusk. Gas lighting, that innovation that had seemed so revolutionary decades earlier, cast sickly circles of yellowish light that barely penetrated the fog. In those pale halos, crimes were committed. Diseases spread. People lived and died in twilight. Doctors operated by candlelight. Students ruined their eyesight reading under kerosene lamps. Mothers gave birth in rooms where shadows danced threateningly against the walls. Darkness was not merely the absence of light. It was fear materialized. It was physical limitation. It was the invisible ceiling preventing civilization from reaching its true potential. Factories couldn't operate 24 hours. Knowledge remained locked in books that no one could read after nightfall. Creativity extinguished when the sun extinguished. We were prisoners of the natural cycle of light and darkness, chained to the same rhythm that had governed human life since the beginning of time. And in winter, when nights lengthened, darkness devoured everything. 16 hours of night in Northern Europe. 16 hours of economic paralysis, of social isolation, of silent desperation. Depression rates increased. Suicides multiplied. Darkness didn't just hide the external world, it revealed the internal world, that abyss of loneliness and fear we all carry inside. But there was something worse than visible darkness. There was an invisible darkness flowing through primitive cables and crude machines. Thomas Edison's direct current illuminated some streets, yes, but its light was weak, limited, expensive. His systems could only transmit electricity 1 mile away. Beyond that, darkness reigned absolute. To illuminate an entire city, you would need a power plant in every neighborhood, a fortune only the wealthiest could afford. Edison's electric light was a luxury, not a solution. It was the privilege of a few while the masses continued living like their grandparents, waiting for dawn like prisoners waiting for freedom. The copper required to wire even a modest city with direct current would bankrupt nations. Engineers calculated the costs and shook their heads. Impossible. The mathematics didn't work. The economics didn't work. The physics didn't work. You could light a few blocks around a power station, but transmitting electricity beyond that? The voltage drop was catastrophic. The energy loss was absurd. To compensate, you'd need cables so thick they couldn't be lifted, so expensive they couldn't be afforded. And so the world remained in darkness. Not because humans lacked ambition, not because we lacked intelligence, but because we lacked vision. We lacked someone who could see beyond the limitations that seemed absolute. Someone who could imagine a completely different approach to a problem that everyone else considered solved as well as it could be. Humanity was desperate. Not with the noisy desperation of a visible crisis, but with that dull, profound desperation that settles in the collective spirit when generation after generation is born and dies facing the same insurmountable limitation. We had conquered continents. We had built empires. We had mapped the stars. But we couldn't defeat the night. We couldn't make light travel. We couldn't free ourselves from the tyranny of distance and darkness. The problem was more than technical. It was existential. Every sunset was a reminder of our fundamental impotence. We could manufacture machines that wove fabric faster than 1,000 human hands. We could build steel ships that defied the ocean. We could send messages across the Atlantic in seconds using submarine cables. But we couldn't extend the day. We couldn't make light shine where we needed it. We couldn't power the factories and homes and dreams of an entire civilization. The engineers of the era knew it. Thomas Edison knew it. His system of direct current had a fatal and insurmountable flaw. Electricity lost its strength with distance according to immutable physical laws. To maintain 120 volts in a light bulb a mile away, you needed cables as thick as tree trunks and copper enough to finance a small war. The resistance in the wires consumed the power. The heat generated was dangerous. The costs were astronomical. Edison knew the limitations of his system. But he also knew it was the best available technology. He had invested everything in it: his reputation, his fortune, his identity as the inventor of the age. He had patents. He had power plants. He had contracts with cities across America and Europe. His direct current empire was built on sand, yes, but it was built. It existed. It made money. And changing it would mean admitting that everything he built was fundamentally flawed. And then there was another kind of darkness. The darkness of ignorance. In 1880, most of humanity didn't have electricity not because it was expensive, but because nobody knew how to generate it efficiently, how to transmit it over long distances, how to convert it into the 1,000 useful forms we needed. Electricity was still a parlor trick, a laboratory phenomenon, a scientific curiosity that had found only limited practical application. Benjamin Franklin had captured lightning in bottles a century earlier. Luigi Galvani had made dead frogs' legs dance with electrical current. Michael Faraday had discovered electromagnetic induction, showing that moving a magnet through a coil of wire produced current. These were miracles of science, yes, but they remained isolated discoveries. Nobody had connected all the pieces. Nobody had seen the complete picture. Nobody had imagined how electricity could become not just a curiosity but the fundamental force powering civilization itself. Humanity needed a visionary. Someone who could see not just what was but what could be. Someone who could imagine a world where electricity flowed like water through pipes, where light shone in every home regardless of distance from the source, where machines worked tirelessly in factories that never slept, where information traveled at the speed of light through wires that spanned continents. Someone who could conceive the inconceivable and then make it real with mathematics, with wire and copper, with transformers and generators and motors. But visionaries are rare. And those who manage to materialize their visions are rarer still. Because seeing the future isn't enough. You have to build it with your own hands, against the resistance of the entire present world. Against skepticism. Against institutional inertia. Against powerful men who have invested fortunes in the old ways. Against those who have vested interests in things remaining as they are. Against your own doubt. Against failure. Against poverty. Against the crushing loneliness of being ahead of your time, of seeing what no one else can see, of speaking truths that sound like madness to contemporary ears. The loneliness of the visionary is absolute. You stand alone on a mountaintop, seeing the promised land, while everyone else remains in the valley, unable to comprehend your descriptions of what lies beyond the horizon. They think you're deluded, insane, a dreamer disconnected from reality. And maybe you are. Maybe the line between vision and delusion is thinner than we'd like to believe. Humanity needed a miracle. But miracles don't fall from the sky like rain. They're not gifts from benevolent gods. They're forged by men and women of flesh and blood, with flaws and obsessions, with fears and failures. Miracles are born in darkness, in isolation, in the furnace of obsession where normal people would break but where certain strange souls are tempered into something harder, something capable of bending reality to match their visions. And in 1856, on a stormy night in a remote village of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that soul was born. Nikola Tesla entered the world during an electrical storm. Lightning tore across the sky over Smiljan, a village so small it barely appeared on maps, a collection of simple houses in the Serbian borderlands where people still lived much as they had for centuries. The midwife, a woman superstitious and traditional, raised in the old Slavic ways, saw the lightning illuminate the room at the exact moment of birth. She saw it as an omen. This child, born as the sky itself burned with electrical fire, would be a son of darkness. A storm child. Cursed. His mother, Juka Tesla, a woman of orthodox faith and iron will, rejected the prophecy immediately. She held her newborn son, still wet and crying as lightning continued to flash outside the window. "No," she declared. "You will be a son of light." Mothers always know. Though perhaps even she couldn't have imagined how literally, how cosmically, her words would prove true. But the price of light would be darkness. The price of touching the future would be losing the present. The price of changing the world would be never truly belonging to it. These are the terms the universe offers its visionaries. These are the conditions of genius. Nikola was a strange child from the beginning. Brilliant beyond all measure, yes, but profoundly, unsettlingly strange. He saw things others didn't see. Flashes of light so intense they blinded him, appearing without warning, interrupting his perception of reality. Visions that crashed into his consciousness with the force of physical blows. At 5 years old, he could already perform integration calculations in his head, manipulating abstract mathematical concepts that most adults couldn't begin to comprehend. At 10, he memorized entire books after reading them once, retaining not just the words but the exact position of each word on each page. But he also counted his steps obsessively, unable to stop himself. He calculated the cubic volume of his food before eating it, measuring and estimating with compulsive precision. He washed his hands until they bled, scrubbing away invisible contaminations that only he could perceive. He couldn't touch other people's hair without experiencing intense disgust. He couldn't look at pearl earrings without feeling physical nausea. Round objects disturbed him. Certain numbers felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. His father, Milutin Tesla, was an Orthodox priest, a man of God, decent and sincere but limited in imagination. He had planned that Nikola would follow in his footsteps toward the priesthood, that this brilliant strange boy would channel his intelligence toward theology and service to the church. Milutin saw his son's obsessions as weaknesses to be corrected, flaws to be trained out of him through discipline and prayer. He couldn't understand that these weren't flaws at all, but symptoms of a mind operating at frequencies most humans couldn't perceive, processing reality through channels that normal consciousness couldn't access. But his mother, Juka, she was different entirely. An inventor herself, without formal education but with a mechanical intuition that was almost supernatural. She created household tools with her own hands, improving on designs that had remained unchanged for generations. She modified local looms, making them more efficient. She invented devices that facilitated domestic work, solving practical problems through pure intuitive understanding of how things worked. And she understood her son in ways his father never could. She saw in his oddities not illness but difference. Not weakness but intensity. Not madness but another form of sanity, one adapted to perceiving things invisible to ordinary minds. She protected him from his father's rigid expectations. She encouraged him in his experiments, even when they seemed pointless or dangerous. She gave him the mental and emotional space to be who he truly was, whatever that might become. And who he truly was someone who lived more in his mind than in the external world. The internal landscape of his consciousness was more real to him than the physical world other people inhabited. He could close his eyes and construct entire machines in perfect detail, so vivid that he could examine them from every angle, test them, improve them, all without touching a single physical tool or drawing a single line on paper. At 17, Nikola fell gravely ill. Cholera swept through the region, killing thousands. For 9 months he lingered at death's edge, his body wasting away, his fever climbing to temperatures that should have destroyed his brain. His family prepared for his death. They prayed. They waited. During those 9 months of delirium, something fundamental in his mind reconfigured itself. The visions that had plagued him all his life became more intense but also more controllable. He discovered he could summon them at will, could manipulate them, could use them as tools for thought. His mental visualization abilities, already extraordinary, became almost supernatural. He could design complete inventions in his head with such detail that he could later build them physically with almost no modification. It was as if his isolation from physical reality during the illness, his extended sojourn in the borderland between life and death, had opened doors in his consciousness that remained locked for others. As if nearly dying had connected him to dimensions of thought that the healthy living couldn't reach. He survived. Against all odds, against all expectations, the fever broke. He recovered. But the boy who emerged from that illness was no longer completely human in the ordinary sense. He was something more. Something less. An instrument perfected for perceiving and manipulating the invisible forces of the universe, but at the cost of never being able to connect completely with other human beings. He had been to the other side and returned changed, carrying knowledge purchased at the price of normalcy. His father finally accepted that Nikola would not be a priest. This strange, brilliant, half-mad son would study engineering instead. And so, in 1875, at 19 years old, Nikola Tesla entered the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, Austria. He was brilliant there, naturally. Too brilliant. He made his professors uncomfortable with his intuitive leaps, his instant comprehension of complex concepts, his ability to perform calculations that took others hours in mere seconds. He memorized complete textbooks after reading them once. He learned 8 languages fluently, not through rote study but through some inexplicable gift of his strange mind. He solved equations that confused men with decades more experience. But he also worked from 3 in the morning until 11 at night, sleeping only a few hours, driving himself with inhuman discipline. He had no friends. Couldn't maintain friendships. Didn't understand the casual social interactions that came naturally to others. He didn't attend parties or social events. He lived completely inside his own mind, inside that vast internal space where he constructed machines and contemplated forces invisible to normal perception. And it was there, in a physics class, where he first saw a Graham dynamo functioning as a direct current motor. His professor, a man named Poschel, was demonstrating the device and explaining its limitations. "Watch the commutators," he said. "See how they spark. See how the brushes wear down. This is inefficient but inevitable. The commutators are necessary to reverse the current at the right moment. This is how electric motors must work. These are the laws of physics. This is reality." Nikola raised his hand. He was 19 years old. He had been at the institute less than a year. But with the unconscious arrogance of genius, with the confidence of someone who had spent his entire life seeing things others couldn't see, he suggested that one could build a motor without commutators or brushes. A motor that worked with alternating current instead of direct current. A motor where the current itself rotated, and the rotor simply followed. Professor Poschel didn't just disagree. He laughed. He laughed openly, mockingly, in front of the entire class. "Impossible," he declared. "Mr. Tesla proposes a perpetual motion machine. He suggests converting a constantly reversing force into continuous rotation. It would be like trying to make water flow uphill by itself. It's a fantasy. A physical impossibility. Mr. Tesla, you may be skilled at mathematics, but you clearly don't understand the fundamental principles of electromagnetism." The other students laughed. They always laugh at the outsider, at the one who suggests the impossible. Nikola, with his extreme sensitivity, with his almost pathological inability to bear social humiliation, felt the laughter like physical blows. His face burned. His hands trembled. He sat down, silent, humiliated before his peers. But something deeper than wounded pride awakened in him in that moment. Something primal and fierce. An obsession took root in his mind like a seed planted in fertile soil. He would prove Poschel wrong. He would invent that impossible motor. He would make alternating current rotate. No matter how long it took. No matter what it cost. No matter if it drove him mad in the process. He didn't know then that this obsession would consume the next 6 years of his life. That it would take him to the absolute edge of sanity. That it would plunge him into an isolation so profound, so complete, that he would lose touch with everything except the problem burning in his mind like a fever that never broke. The 6 years that followed were a descent into darkness. Not the darkness of the world, but the darkness of the obsessed mind, the darkness that descends when you abandon everything else to pursue a single vision. Nikola abandoned the university before graduating. He couldn't focus on anything except his impossible motor. His father died disappointed, never understanding why his brilliant son had thrown away his education, his future, for an impossible dream. Nikola wandered through Central Europe like a ghost, taking jobs here and there, whatever he could find. He worked as a draftsman, as an assistant in telephone companies that were just beginning to spread across Europe, in nascent electrical firms that were trying to implement Edison's direct current systems. But these were just ways to survive, to keep his body alive while his mind pursued its obsession. Every waking moment was consumed by the problem. How to make alternating current rotate. How to capture the wave, the oscillation, the rhythm of electricity itself and transform it into smooth mechanical motion. How to do what Poschel said was impossible. At night, in cramped rooms lit by single candles, rooms so small he could barely turn around, he worked. He filled notebooks with diagrams, with equations, with calculations. He built mental models so detailed, so complete, that he could see every wire, every coil, every rotating component. He could watch them operate in his mind's eye, could see the current flowing, could observe the magnetic fields interacting. But it didn't work. None of it worked. The mathematics suggested it should be possible. The physics implied a solution existed somewhere in the equations. But he couldn't see it, couldn't grasp it. The answer remained just beyond his reach, tormenting him, driving him forward, consuming him. And the isolation deepened with each passing month. He stopped responding to letters from his family, from the few friends who still tried to maintain contact. He ate irregularly, sometimes forgetting food for days, then gorging when hunger finally penetrated his concentration. He lost weight. His health deteriorated. His few acquaintances noticed he was becoming stranger, more withdrawn, more peculiar in his behaviors and mannerisms. He would stop mid-conversation, his eyes glazing over, lost in some internal vision that was more real to him than the person speaking. He developed rituals, compulsions that he couldn't control or explain. He had to walk around a block 3 times before entering a building. He refused to shake hands with anyone. He couldn't stand to be near anyone wearing jewelry. He counted everything compulsively, unable to stop himself. These weren't just eccentricities. They were symptoms of a mind being pushed far beyond normal human limits, into territories where consciousness itself begins to fragment. When you spend every moment focused on a single problem, when you retreat so completely into abstraction that the physical world becomes almost unreal, something breaks. Or transforms. The line between genius and madness isn't a line at all. It's a territory, a dangerous borderland where the greatest discoveries and the most complete breakdowns exist side by side, separated by nothing more than luck and timing. In 1882, Tesla was in Budapest, working for the Central Telegraph Office. He was 26 years old. He had been pursuing his impossible motor for 6 years. 6 years of total obsession. 6 years of failure. He was exhausted in ways that go beyond physical tiredness. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually depleted. Used up. His nervous system had become so sensitive, so overloaded, that ordinary sensations felt overwhelming. He could hear a watch ticking 3 rooms away. The sound of a fly landing on a table felt like thunder in his skull. A ray of sunlight felt like being struck by lightning. His body was shutting down, overwhelmed by the intensity of his own consciousness. He was having a nervous breakdown, slowly, inexorably, approaching the edge of complete collapse. His friend Antal Sigidi, one of the very few people who still tried to maintain any connection with this strange, isolated man, grew worried. He convinced Nikola to take walks, to leave his room, to see the sun, to move his body. Simple things. Things that normal people did without thinking. But for Tesla, even these simple acts required enormous effort, pulling himself away from the problem that consumed every thought. It was during one of these walks at sunset in the Budapest city park that everything changed. They were walking slowly, Sigidi trying to make conversation, Nikola mostly silent, lost in his own thoughts. And then Nikola began reciting poetry as he sometimes did. Goethe's Faust, one of his favorite works, a play about a man who sells his soul for knowledge and power. He was speaking the lines where Faust watches the sun set and wishes he could follow it, to have eternal daylight, to escape the darkness. His voice was soft, almost dreamy as the words fell from his lips. The glow retreats, done is the day of toil. Yonder hastes, new fields of life exploring. Ah, that no wing can lift me from the soil, upon its track to follow soaring. And then it happened. The vision struck him with the force of a physical blow. He stopped walking abruptly. His body went rigid. Sigidi thought he was having a seizure, reached out to steady him. But Nikola's eyes were open, wide open, staring at something that wasn't there. Or staring at something that was there but that only he could see. He saw it. The complete rotating magnetic field. Not as an abstract concept, not as mathematics or physics, but as a physical reality as clear and solid as the sunset before him. He saw how alternating current, flowing through coils of wire positioned at angles to each other, would create a magnetic field that rotated by itself, without any mechanical intervention. No commutators. No brushes. No physical contact between moving parts. The electricity itself would rotate, and the metal rotor would simply follow, dragged along by invisible forces like a leaf caught in a whirlpool. It was so simple. So elegant. So obvious. How had no one seen it before? How had he not seen it for 6 years? The answer had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment, the right state of mind, the right alignment of exhaustion and desperation in sunset light. He grabbed a stick from the ground and began drawing frantically in the dirt path. Sigidi watched, bewildered and alarmed, as Nikola sketched diagram after diagram, talking rapidly in a mixture of languages, explaining, calculating, his hands shaking with excitement. The polyphase system. Multiple currents out of phase with each other. The rotating magnetic field. The induction motor. The transformer that could step voltage up or down. The complete system of alternating current generation, transmission, and utilization. In that single moment of vision, in that flash of insight born from 6 years of isolation and obsession and near madness, Nikola Tesla saw the electrical system that would power the modern world. Everything. All of it. Complete. Perfect. Inevitable. 6 years of darkness. 6 years of failure. 6 years of isolation so complete that he had almost lost himself entirely. And then, in one moment, clarity. Vision. The answer. But this was just the beginning. The isolation wasn't over. In many ways it was about to deepen. Because seeing the future and building it are two different things. Having the vision and convincing the world are two different things. Now came the harder part. Now came the battle. Now came the war that would be fought not with weapons but with electricity, with patents, with propaganda, with the full force of entrenched interests who had everything to lose from this new truth. Nikola Tesla had survived the isolation of obsession. He had transformed loneliness into genius, had forged his strange mind into an instrument capable of perceiving what others couldn't see. But now he had to do something even harder. He had to make people believe. Tesla left Budapest with his vision burning in his mind like a sacred fire. He made his way to Paris, to the Continental Edison Company, one of the many subsidiaries spreading Thomas Edison's direct current empire across Europe. He needed work. He needed money. But more than that, he needed access to equipment, to workshops, to the materials required to transform his mental vision into physical reality. They hired him immediately. His reputation had preceded him. Brilliant troubleshooter. Could diagnose electrical problems instantly. Could redesign dynamos to produce more power with less material. Could fix systems that other engineers had declared beyond repair. He traveled across France and Germany, solving problems in Edison's direct current installations, improving efficiency, making the flawed system work slightly better. But his real work happened at night. In borrowed workshop space, using scrap materials, he built models of his alternating current motor. Small ones at first. Crude prototypes. But they worked. The rotor spun smoothly, dragged along by the rotating magnetic field, exactly as he had seen in his vision. No sparks. No friction. No wear. Pure, elegant conversion of electrical energy into mechanical motion. He demonstrated his motors to his supervisors at Continental Edison. They watched politely. They acknowledged the technical achievement. And then they explained, with the patience of men instructing a child, that the company was in the business of direct current. That alternating current was dangerous, uncontrollable, impractical. That Edison himself had declared it unsuitable for power distribution. That there was no market for such a system. Thank you for the demonstration, Mr. Tesla, but please return to your assigned work. The isolation became intellectual. He was surrounded by engineers, by men who understood electricity, who could discuss circuits and voltage and resistance. But none of them could see what he saw. He tried to explain. He showed calculations proving that alternating current could be transmitted hundreds of miles with minimal loss. He demonstrated how transformers could step voltage up for efficient transmission and down for safe use. He explained the complete system, generation to distribution to utilization. They nodded politely. They acknowledged his intelligence. And they went back to maintaining the profitable, limited, inferior direct current systems that made Edison rich. It was like being the only person who could see color in a world that insisted everything was black and white. Like trying to describe symphonies to people who had only heard single notes. He had the solution to humanity's desperate problem, and no one would listen because they couldn't see it, couldn't imagine it, couldn't believe that everything they knew was about to become obsolete. His supervisor, Charles Batchelor, one of Edison's most trusted men, saw something in Tesla though. Saw past the strangeness, past the obsessions, past the social awkwardness. Saw the genius. And he gave Tesla a letter of introduction. If you really want to pursue your ideas, he said, go to America. Go to New York. Go to Thomas Edison himself. If anyone has the resources and vision to implement new electrical technologies, it's the Wizard of Menlo Park. In 1884, at 28 years old, Nikola Tesla boarded a ship bound for New York. He carried 4 cents in his pocket, a bag of drawings and calculations, and a letter of introduction that read in part, I know 2 great men and you are one of them. The other is this young man. He didn't know he was sailing toward the greatest betrayal of his life. Toward a war that would be fought not with weapons but with electricity and propaganda and the full ruthless force of American capitalism. Toward a battle that would nearly destroy him completely but would ultimately electrify the world. The voyage was terrible. Storms. Sickness. And then, in the chaos of disembarking, his luggage was stolen. Everything. His clothes. His money. His drawings. Everything except the letter of introduction, which he had kept in his coat pocket. He arrived in America with literally nothing. Spoke barely functional English. Knew no one. had no resources. Just a vision and a letter to a man who might or might not agree to see him. But he found his way to Edison's laboratory in Lower Manhattan, presented the letter. And Thomas Edison, the most famous inventor in the world, the man who had brought electric light to America, agreed to meet this strange Serbian immigrant. The meeting was brief. Edison was a practical man, impatient with theory, suspicious of formal education, built on intuition and endless trial and error rather than mathematical elegance. Tesla was his opposite in every way. Educated, theoretical, able to perform calculations in his head that Edison needed teams of assistants to verify. Edison worked by building 1,000 prototypes until one worked. Tesla designed perfect machines in his mind before building anything. Edison offered Tesla a job. $50 a week to improve his direct current dynamos. To make them more efficient. To fix problems in the system. Tesla accepted. He needed the work. Needed the money. And perhaps, he thought, if he proved himself valuable, Edison would listen to his ideas about alternating current. He worked like a man possessed. 18-hour days. 20-hour days. He redesigned Edison's dynamos from the ground up. He created 24 different designs, each one more efficient than the last. He solved problems that had plagued Edison's system for years. He did the work of 10 men. And Edison noticed. One day, impressed by Tesla's results, Edison made an offer. "There's $50,000 in it for you," he said, "if you can redesign our entire DC system. Make it more efficient. Reduce costs. Improve reliability." $50,000. A fortune. Life-changing money. Tesla threw himself into the work with everything he had. Months of effort. Redesigning generators, motors, regulators, every component of the system. And he succeeded. He delivered everything Edison asked for and more. Improvements that would save Edison's company millions. When he asked for the promised payment, Edison laughed. "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor," he said. "That was a joke. We can't pay you $50,000. Here's a raise instead. $10 more per week." The betrayal was complete. Tesla had been lied to, used, discarded. He resigned immediately. And found himself on the streets of New York, penniless, unknown, with a vision that no one would finance. The next 2 years were the darkest of Tesla's life. Darker even than the 6 years of obsession before his vision in Budapest. Because then he had been alone but pursuing his dream. Now he was alone and unable to pursue anything. He dug ditches for $2 a day. Laid cable for Edison's systems, the very direct current technology he knew was inferior. His hands blistered. His back ached. His brilliant mind, capable of conceiving systems that could change the world, was employed in manual labor. The foreman of his crew didn't know he had a genius digging alongside common laborers. Didn't know that the strange immigrant who counted his shovel strokes and refused to work near anyone wearing jewelry held patents and designs that would revolutionize civilization. To them, he was just another foreign worker, strange and isolated, tolerated because he worked hard. The isolation was absolute now. Physical, intellectual, social, spiritual. He was surrounded by people but completely alone. His mind operated in dimensions they couldn't perceive. His vision of the future meant nothing when he couldn't afford to eat. The cruel irony consumed him. He had the answer. He had the solution to humanity's desperate need for efficient electrical distribution, and he was digging ditches in the mud. But isolation had always been Tesla's forge, the place where he was tempered. And in the depths of that darkness, fortune finally shifted. One of his fellow workers mentioned Tesla's ideas to his friend, a Western Union superintendent named Alfred Brown. Brown was intrigued. He arranged a meeting. Tesla, exhausted and filthy from a day of digging, explained his alternating current system to Brown and a lawyer named Charles Peck. They understood. Not completely, not the way Tesla did, but enough. Enough to see the commercial potential. Enough to see that if this strange immigrant was telling the truth, they were looking at a technology that could obsolete Edison's entire empire. They formed a company. Tesla Electric Light and Manufacturing. They would finance Tesla's work in exchange for a share of the patents. Finally, at 30 years old, after years of isolation and poverty and betrayal, Tesla had a chance to build his vision. He set up a laboratory on Grand Street. He built his polyphase alternating current system piece by piece. The generators, the motors, the transformers. Everything he had seen in that moment of vision in Budapest, now made real in copper and iron and insulated wire. In 1888, he demonstrated his complete system to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. The audience watched in stunned silence as his motors ran smoothly, efficiently, powered by alternating current transmitted through thin wires. No sparks. No friction. No commutators or brushes to wear out. The efficiency was remarkable. The implications were staggering. Among the audience was a representative of George Westinghouse, the industrialist and inventor who had built an empire on air brakes and natural gas distribution. Westinghouse understood immediately what Tesla had created. This was the future. This was how to win the war against Edison's direct current monopoly. Westinghouse offered Tesla $1 million for his patents, plus royalties on every horsepower of electricity generated by his system. It was a fortune beyond anything Tesla had imagined. Financial security for life. Recognition at last. But Thomas Edison saw it too. Saw that this strange Serbian immigrant he had cheated and discarded now held patents that threatened everything Edison had built. And Edison decided to fight. Not with better technology because he knew direct current was inferior, but with propaganda, with fear, with the full ruthless power of his reputation and resources. Thus began the War of Currents. The battle that would determine how the world would be electrified. Edison versus Westinghouse. Direct current versus alternating current. But really, it was Edison versus Tesla, the practical American folk hero against the strange isolated foreigner, the battle fought in newspapers and demonstrations and the court of public opinion. Edison launched a campaign of terror. He hired men to electrocute dogs and cats in public demonstrations, using alternating current to show how dangerous it was. He lobbied states to adopt alternating current for the electric chair, to associate Tesla's technology with death. He published pamphlets warning that alternating current in homes would kill children. He called it the executioner's current. He used every tool of propaganda and fear to convince the public that Tesla's superior technology was too dangerous to implement. And it worked. People were afraid. Cities hesitated to adopt alternating current. Westinghouse's company struggled against the tide of negative publicity. Tesla watched in horror as his technology, which could liberate humanity from darkness, was portrayed as an instrument of death. The isolation deepened again. Different now. He was famous, yes, but famous as a threat. As the man whose dangerous technology killed dogs in public demonstrations. The man whose current executed criminals. He tried to explain that electricity itself wasn't dangerous, that it was all about application and safety measures, that Edison's direct current could kill just as easily. But Edison had the advantage. Edison was American, familiar, trusted. Tesla was foreign, strange, difficult to understand. The war raged for years. Westinghouse's company hemorrhaged money fighting Edison's propaganda campaign. By 1891, Westinghouse was nearly bankrupt. He came to Tesla with a terrible request. The royalty agreement was going to destroy the company. $1 million plus royalties on every horsepower meant that as the technology spread, the payments would become astronomical. "We can't survive under these terms," Westinghouse said. "We need to renegotiate." Tesla understood what this meant. His financial security. His fortune. Everything he had been promised. But he also understood something deeper. If Westinghouse went bankrupt, Edison would win. Direct current would remain the standard. His vision would die. The world would remain in darkness, limited, constrained by inferior technology. Tesla tore up the contract. Just tore it to pieces. "Mr. Westinghouse," he said, "you have been my only friend. You believed in me when no one else would. You gave me the chance to realize my life's work. The benefits that will come to civilization from my polyphase system mean more to me than the money involved." He gave up millions, gave up his fortune, chose his vision over his security. It was perhaps the most significant sacrifice of his life, and one of the most consequential decisions in technological history. Because without that sacrifice, Westinghouse would have failed, and the world's electrical infrastructure might have developed very differently. But the war wasn't over. It wouldn't be decided by patents or demonstrations or propaganda. It would be decided by something much bigger. Something that would prove, once and for all, whose vision of electrical power was correct. The Niagara Falls Commission was planning the largest hydroelectric project in history. They would harness the incredible power of Niagara Falls itself and transmit it to Buffalo, 22 miles away. It would be the definitive test. Could alternating current really transmit power over long distances efficiently? Or was Edison right that only direct current was practical and safe? Every major electrical company in the world submitted proposals. Edison submitted a direct current plan that would have required multiple power stations and cables thick enough to be visible from space. The costs were astronomical. The inefficiency was obvious. But it was Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, the most famous inventor in the world. Tesla and Westinghouse submitted an alternating current proposal. Thin wires, high voltage transmission, transformers to step it down for use. Elegant, efficient, revolutionary, but unproven at this scale, and designed by a strange foreigner that Edison had convinced half of America was dangerous. The commission deliberated for months. The decision would shape the future of electrical infrastructure worldwide, would determine whether humanity's desperate need for light and power would be met with Edison's limited, expensive system or Tesla's revolutionary, efficient one. In 1893, the Commission announced its decision. They chose alternating current. They chose Tesla's system. Not because of propaganda or personality or nationality, but because the mathematics was undeniable. The physics was irrefutable. The efficiency was overwhelming. Truth had won over fear. On November 16, 1896, the switch was thrown. Alternating current generated at Niagara Falls flowed through thin wires to Buffalo, lighting the city. The first large-scale demonstration of long-distance power transmission. Tesla's impossible dream realized. His vision vindicated. His years of isolation and obsession and sacrifice justified. The world changed in that moment. Within years, alternating current became the standard everywhere. Edison's direct current systems were abandoned or converted. Cities across America and Europe adopted Tesla's polyphase system. The modern electrical grid was born. Humanity's desperate need for light, for power, for liberation from the tyranny of darkness and distance, was finally actually completely solved. Nikola Tesla, the strange isolated immigrant that Edison had mocked and cheated, had won. Had electrified the world. Had transformed isolation into genius and genius into the foundation of modern civilization. But the story doesn't end there. Because every gift carries a curse. Every solution creates new problems. And the technology that liberated humanity would also enable its capacity for destruction on scales previously unimaginable. The alternating current that lit homes would also power factories of war. The electrical grid that connected civilization would also create dependencies and vulnerabilities. The man who gave the world light would spend his final decades watching that light used for purposes he never intended, consumed by visions of weapons and technologies that terrified him. The impact was not gradual. It was explosive. Within 5 years of Niagara Falls, the world began to transform at a pace humanity had never experienced. Cities that had slept in darkness for millennia suddenly blazed with light 24 hours a day. Factories that had closed at sunset now ran 3 shifts continuously. The productive capacity of civilization doubled, then tripled, then expanded beyond what economists could measure or predict. The night, that ancient enemy, that primal fear, was defeated. We had conquered darkness itself. But it was more than just light. Tesla's alternating current system didn't just illuminate, it animated. It brought machines to life. Electric motors, powered by his polyphase system, began replacing steam engines, water wheels, human and animal labor. They were cleaner, more efficient, infinitely more controllable. A factory could be built anywhere now, not just near rivers or coal supplies. Power could flow through thin wires to any location. Geography itself became less tyrannical. The economic transformation was staggering. Productivity exploded. Manufacturing costs plummeted. New industries emerged almost overnight. Electric streetcars replaced horse-drawn carriages. Electric elevators made skyscrapers practical, and cities began growing upward as well as outward. Refrigeration became common, transforming food distribution, reducing spoilage, improving nutrition. Electric pumps brought clean water and modern sanitation to millions. The death rate from infectious disease began its dramatic decline. The human cost of this transformation is difficult to calculate, but try to imagine what it meant for a mother to have electric light for the first time, to no longer fear her children would knock over a kerosene lamp and burn the house down. To be able to read to them at night without ruining her eyesight. To have a home that was brighter, safer, cleaner. To imagine what it meant for a factory worker to labor under electric lights instead of in dangerous gloom, to operate machines that didn't fill his lungs with coal smoke. To imagine what it meant for a surgeon to perform operations under bright, steady electric light instead of by flickering gas lamps, saving lives that would have been lost in the shadows. Culture transformed. The evening, previously a time of retreat and rest, became productive, social, creative. Theaters blazed with electric lights. Restaurants stayed open late. Libraries extended their hours. Knowledge became more accessible because people could read and study after dark. The pace of innovation accelerated because inventors and scientists could work through the night. Art flourished. Music flourished. Everything humanity could do during daylight we could now do around the clock. The psychological impact was perhaps even more profound. For the first time in human history we were not bound by the sun. We controlled our environment. We determined when there was light and when there was darkness. This shift in consciousness, subtle but absolute, changed how humans thought about themselves and their relationship to nature. We were no longer subject to natural rhythms. We could impose our will. We could reshape reality itself according to our needs and desires. Cities became symbols of this new age. New York, Paris, London, they didn't just grow, they transformed into entirely new forms of human habitation. The skyline changed. Buildings rose higher because electric elevators made vertical transportation practical. Streets stayed crowded long after sunset because electric lights made them safe. The rhythm of life accelerated. Time became more valuable because there was more of it available. Sleep became something to be minimized rather than a natural necessity consuming half of life. And the changes cascaded. Electric power enabled radio, which would revolutionize communication. It enabled cinema, transforming entertainment and culture. It enabled refrigeration on industrial scales, transforming agriculture and diet. It enabled mass production techniques that would create the consumer economy. Every advance built on Tesla's fundamental innovation, the efficient generation and distribution of electrical power. The 20th century, with all its wonders and horrors, was built on the foundation of alternating current. Tesla himself became a celebrity. The strange, isolated Serbian immigrant was now internationally famous. He gave demonstrations of his technology that seemed like magic to contemporary audiences. He lit lamps wirelessly. He passed millions of volts through his own body without harm. He created artificial lightning in his laboratory. He became known as the wizard, the magician, the man who commanded the fundamental forces of nature. But fame didn't cure his isolation. If anything, it deepened it. He was surrounded by people now, by admirers and investors and journalists, but he was still fundamentally alone. Still counting his steps. Still unable to touch people. Still experiencing visions and sensations that no one else could comprehend. The internal landscape of his consciousness remained inaccessible to others. He could share his inventions but not his experience of conceiving them. And he kept inventing, kept pushing forward. He didn't stop with alternating current. He developed radio communication before Marconi, though Marconi would receive the credit and the Nobel Prize. He experimented with X-rays. He designed bladeless turbines of remarkable efficiency. He conceived of wireless transmission of power and information, imagining a world where energy and data flowed through the air itself, freely available to anyone anywhere. He was decades, sometimes a century ahead of his time. But the world couldn't keep up with him anymore. His inventions became more radical, more difficult to understand, more challenging to commercialize. Investors who had grown rich on his alternating current system were less willing to fund his more speculative research. The practical applications weren't immediately obvious. The profit margins weren't clear. And Tesla himself was becoming more eccentric, more isolated, more difficult to work with. Yet the impact of what he had already given the world continued to expand. By 1900, most major cities in the developed world had electric power. By 1920, electricity was reaching rural areas. By 1950, electrical infrastructure had spread across continents. The modern world, as we know it, as we live in it, was built on Tesla's vision in that park in Budapest, on his refusal to accept the limitations that everyone else considered absolute, on his transformation of isolation into genius. The economic value created by his alternating current system is literally incalculable. Trillions of dollars. Tens of trillions. Every electric motor, every power grid, every device plugged into a wall socket, all of it traces back to Tesla's polyphase system. He gave up his royalties to save Westinghouse's company, sacrificed millions, but the technology he created generated wealth beyond measure. Just not for him. Because that's the cruel irony at the heart of Tesla's story. The man who electrified the world died poor. The inventor whose technology created industries and fortunes and transformed civilization spent his final years living in hotels, moving when he couldn't pay the rent, feeding pigeons in the park, sustained by a small pension from the Yugoslavian government and the charity of friends. But before we reach that tragic ending, we must confront the darkness. Because the light Tesla gave the world cast shadows. Deep shadows. Shadows that would grow into horrors he never imagined. The same electrical infrastructure that illuminated homes and powered factories also powered weapons. The industrial capacity that electricity enabled was turned toward war. World War I saw electric lights allowing night fighting, electric motors powering tanks and submarines, electric communications coordinating death on scales previously impossible. The factories that ran 3 shifts producing consumer goods could just as easily run 3 shifts producing munitions. Tesla watched in horror as his technology, conceived to liberate humanity, was weaponized. He had given the world tools, and the world had forged them into swords. The electrical grid that connected civilization also made it vulnerable. Cut the power and cities went dark. Factories stopped. Hospitals lost life-saving equipment. The dependency on electricity became total, absolute, and therefore exploitable. And then there were the weapons he himself conceived. Tesla's mind didn't stop at peaceful applications. He envisioned directed energy weapons, particle beam devices, technologies for wireless transmission of power that could be weaponized. He claimed to have designed a death ray capable of destroying aircraft at hundreds of miles distance. Whether these designs were practical or the fantasies of an aging, increasingly paranoid mind, no one knows. He never revealed the complete plans. But the principle was sound. Energy could be weaponized. Electricity could kill as easily as it could illuminate. The ethical weight of this crushed him. He had wanted to free humanity, to give us light and power and the tools to build paradise. Instead, he had given us more efficient ways to kill each other. The 20th century became the bloodiest in human history, and much of that blood was enabled by the electrical infrastructure he created. Factories powered by alternating current produced millions of weapons. Electric lights allowed round-the-clock production of instruments of death. He began to retreat further into himself. His isolation, which had once been the source of his genius, became a prison. He lived alone in hotel rooms, avoiding human contact, speaking mainly to the pigeons he fed in Bryant Park. He became obsessed with the number 3, with cleanliness, with elaborate rituals that made less and less sense to outside observers but provided some structure to his fragmenting consciousness. The press, which had once celebrated him, now portrayed him as a mad scientist, a figure of fun, the eccentric hermit making grandiose claims about impossible inventions. Death rays and earthquake machines and wireless power transmission to Mars. The world had moved on. Edison was dead. Westinghouse was dead. The great electrical pioneers were passing, and the new generation of engineers and businessmen saw Tesla as a relic, a strange old man whose important work was decades in the past. But the world he had created continued its remorseless expansion. By 1930, by 1940, electrical infrastructure had become the foundation of modern civilization. Every aspect of life depended on it. Remove electricity and cities would collapse within days. Millions would die. We had become dependent on the gift Tesla had given us, so dependent that we couldn't imagine existence without it. And with that dependency came new moral questions. Who controlled the power? Who decided who had access to electricity and who didn't? Electrical infrastructure required massive capital investment, creating natural monopolies. In most countries, electrical distribution became a government function or heavily regulated utility. The democratization of power that Tesla had envisioned, wireless energy freely available to all, never materialized. Instead, electricity became another commodity, another source of profit and power and inequality. The environmental costs were invisible at first. The coal burned to generate electricity. The rivers dammed to produce hydroelectric power. The copper mined to string wires. The forests cleared to make way for transmission lines. Tesla's system was efficient, yes, far more efficient than Edison's direct current, but efficiency is not the same as sustainability. The appetite for power grew exponentially. The more we had, the more we wanted, the more we needed. We built a civilization that consumed energy on scales that would have been incomprehensible to previous generations. Tesla saw some of this, worried about it. He envisioned renewable energy sources, ways to harness the sun and the wind and the tides. He understood that burning fossil fuels couldn't continue forever. But his warnings, like so many of his later ideas, were ignored. The world was too busy enjoying the benefits of electrification to worry about long-term consequences. World War II proved the military applications of electrical technology beyond any doubt. Radar, powered by electricity. Computers, primitive but revolutionary, powered by electricity. The Manhattan Project, the development of atomic weapons, required massive electrical infrastructure. The uranium enrichment facilities at Oak Ridge consumed more electricity than many entire countries. The ultimate weapon, the technology that gave humanity the power to destroy itself completely, was only possible because of the electrical infrastructure that Tesla had made possible. He died in 1943 in the middle of that war, alone in a New York hotel room. He was 86 years old. Poor. Isolated. Largely forgotten by a world that had moved on to newer innovations, newer celebrities. The FBI seized his papers, looking for weapon designs, for technological secrets. They found notebooks full of ideas, some brilliant, some impossible to evaluate, some seemingly the products of a mind that had finally, completely lost touch with reality. But what they couldn't seize, what couldn't be classified or controlled, was the legacy already embedded in civilization itself. Every power line, every electric motor, every device drawing current from a wall socket, every city blazing with light against the darkness. All of it was Tesla's legacy. All of it proved that his isolation had not been in vain, that his obsession had transformed the world, that his sacrifice had meaning beyond what any single life could contain. Today, more than 80 years after his death, we live in the world Tesla created. Not the world he imagined, perhaps, He had envisioned wireless power, free energy technology used purely for peace and enlightenment. Instead, we got a world wired and dependent, powerful and fragile, illuminated and still somehow dark. But it is his world nonetheless. The alternating current that powers your home, your computer, your lights as you listen to these words, that's Tesla's gift. The electrical grid that connects continents, enabling communication and commerce and culture, that's his vision made real. His patents have long since expired. His name adorns a car company that he had nothing to do with, selling electric vehicles he never imagined. But his fundamental contribution, the polyphase alternating current system, remains the foundation of our civilization. Every improvement, every advancement in electrical technology builds on what he created. The modern world is impossible without it. Remove alternating current, and civilization would collapse within hours. Food spoils. Water stops flowing. Hospitals go dark. Communications fail. The global economy halts. 7 billion people depend on infrastructure that traces directly back to a vision that struck a strange, isolated Serbian immigrant in a park in Budapest in 1882. That's legacy. Not fame or fortune, though Tesla deserved both and received neither in sufficient measure. But the transformation of human civilization itself, the conquest of darkness, the liberation from the tyranny of distance and the limitations of direct current. The creation of infrastructure that would enable everything that followed, from radio to television to computers to the internet. Tesla didn't invent all of those technologies, but none of them would exist without the electrical foundation he provided. And perhaps most importantly, he proved something profound about the relationship between isolation and innovation. He showed that being apart from the world, being unable to connect in conventional ways, being strange and obsessive and different, these are not always disabilities. Sometimes they are necessary conditions for genius. His isolation allowed him to see what others couldn't see, to think thoughts that others couldn't think, to persist in pursuit of solutions when everyone else had given up or declared the problem unsolvable. The polyphase system inspired generations of engineers and inventors. It showed that fundamental transformations were possible, that problems everyone considered solved could be solved better, that the impossible was sometimes just the not yet imagined. Every subsequent revolution in electrical engineering, from radio to radar to solid-state electronics to wireless communications, carried forward the principle Tesla demonstrated. That elegant solutions exist if you're willing to see the problem differently, if you're willing to work in isolation until the vision becomes clear, if you're willing to sacrifice everything to make the impossible real. His methods, too, became influential. The ability to design and test inventions entirely in the mind, to visualize complete systems before building them, to work through problems theoretically before committing resources to physical construction. This approach, combining deep theoretical understanding with practical engineering intuition, became the model for 20th century technological innovation. Tesla proved that you didn't need Edison's thousands of failed prototypes if you could see the solution clearly enough in your mind first. But perhaps his most enduring legacy is the question his life poses. What is the cost of genius? What price do we ask visionaries to pay? Tesla gave the world light and power and the foundation of modern civilization. In return, the world gave him betrayal and isolation and poverty. He changed everything. He received almost nothing. Is that acceptable? Is that inevitable? His story suggests that we don't value our visionaries properly, that we exploit their gifts and discard the givers, that genius is rewarded with everything except what the genius actually needs. Consider the pattern. Tesla had the vision. Westinghouse commercialized it. Edison fought it. Utility companies profited from it. Cities were transformed by it. And Tesla died alone, feeding pigeons, his greatest inventions unrealized, his later ideas dismissed as delusions. The world took what it wanted and moved on. That's not how the story should end. But that's how it ended. Yet standing here now, more than a century after Tesla's triumph at Niagara Falls, we can see that his isolation produced something that transcended his personal tragedy. He survived it. More than survived, he transformed it. He took the loneliness that would have destroyed a normal person and forged it into the tool that reshaped civilization. His inability to connect with people became the source of his ability to connect with forces that most humans couldn't even perceive. His obsessions became his instruments. His strangeness became his strength. And in the end, every light that burns in the darkness is a monument to him. Every motor that turns. Every device that draws power from the grid. They don't bear his name. Most people who use them don't know his story. But they exist because one strange, isolated man refused to accept that the impossible had to remain impossible. Because he transformed 6 years of obsession into a single moment of vision. Because he gave up his fortune to ensure his technology would survive. Because he understood that his vision mattered more than his comfort, more than his wealth, more than his life. That's what it means to survive isolation. Not just to endure it, but to use it. To let it forge you into something harder, sharper, capable of cutting through the world's resistance. To emerge from the darkness carrying light. Not for yourself, because Tesla lived and died in forms of darkness that electricity could never illuminate. But for everyone else. For the future. For humanity's desperate need to transcend its limitations and become something more than cave dwellers afraid of the night. Nikola Tesla survived isolation to electrify the world. But more than that, he proved that isolation, that terrible human condition we all fear, can be transformed into genius if you're willing to pay the price. If you're willing to be strange. To be alone. To be misunderstood. To see what others can't see and persist until they finally, grudgingly, admit that you were right all along. Every light that burns in the darkness is his answer. Every city that blazes against the night is his monument. Every device that draws power from the alternating current grid is proof that one man's isolation, properly transformed, properly wielded, properly sacrificed, can illuminate the entire world. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that has to be enough. Because we can't change his story. We can't go back and give him the recognition, the wealth, the human connection he deserved. But we can understand what he gave us. We can honor the sacrifice. We can remember that the light we take for granted was purchased at a price we can barely imagine. We live in Tesla's world. We draw power from his vision. We are all, every one of us, beneficiaries of his isolation. The least we can do is remember. And perhaps, the next time we encounter someone strange, isolated, obsessed with impossible ideas, we might pause before dismissing them. Because Tesla teaches us that genius often looks like madness. That vision often looks like delusion. That the person everyone considers crazy might be the only one who sees clearly. That isolation might not be a curse but a crucible. That the strange, lonely outsider might hold the key to humanity's next great leap forward. Turn on a light. Any light. And remember the man who made it possible. The strange, brilliant, isolated Serbian immigrant who saw what no one else could see, who persisted when everyone said it was impossible, who gave up everything so that we might have light. That's legacy. That's immortality. Not comfort in life, but transformation of civilization itself. Not belonging to the world, but changing it so fundamentally that it can never return to what it was before. Nikola Tesla survived isolation to electrify the world. And in doing so, he showed us that the loneliest among us might carry the brightest light, if only we have the wisdom to see it, the courage to support it, and the grace to honor it when at last, inevitably, tragically, beautifully, impossibly, that light breaks through the darkness and illuminates everything. But the story of Tesla's isolation doesn't end with his triumph. In many ways it was just beginning its final, most painful chapter. Because there is a particular cruelty in being vindicated. In being proven right. In watching the world adopt your vision and then forgetting you ever existed. Tesla had conquered darkness for humanity, but he could not conquer the darkness that was closing in around his own life. After Niagara Falls, after the victory of alternating current, Tesla's mind didn't rest. Couldn't rest. It kept racing forward, conceiving technologies decades or even centuries ahead of his time. In 1898, he demonstrated radio-controlled boats in Madison Square Garden, what we would now call robotics or drones. The audience thought it was magic trickery. They couldn't comprehend that machines could be controlled wirelessly, that intelligence could be transmitted through the air itself. Tesla tried to interest the military. Imagine, he said, warships controlled remotely, keeping sailors out of danger. They dismissed him. Too fantastical. Too impractical. He became obsessed with wireless transmission of power. Not just information but actual electrical energy transmitted through the air or through the earth itself, freely available to anyone anywhere. He envisioned a world where power stations were unnecessary, where every device could draw energy from the ambient field he would create, where electricity would be as freely available as sunlight. It was the logical extension of his alternating current system. He had freed power transmission from the limitations of distance. Now he would free it from the requirement of wires entirely. In 1900, he convinced the financier J.P. Morgan to fund this vision. Morgan gave him $150,000 to build a massive transmission tower at Wardenclyffe on Long Island. It would be the prototype, the proof of concept, the beginning of a global system of wireless power transmission. Tesla threw himself into the project with all the intensity of his youth, working obsessively, sleeping barely at all, consumed once again by vision. He built Wardenclyffe, a tower 187 feet tall, with elaborate underground caverns, designed to use the earth itself as a conductor. It was beautiful, audacious, absolutely unprecedented. And it almost worked. Tesla claimed he could transmit power to devices miles away. He demonstrated wireless lighting. He sent signals that were detected across the Atlantic. But almost isn't enough. Almost doesn't attract investment. Almost doesn't change the world. And then Morgan discovered that Tesla's real goal wasn't just communication, which could be monetized, but free wireless power available to everyone. There's no profit in free. No way to meter it. No way to control who uses it. No way to build an empire on it. Morgan cut off funding. Tesla begged. He pleaded. He promised anything. Morgan refused. And without Morgan, no other investors would touch the project. Wardenclyffe was abandoned, incomplete, a monument to a dream that the world wasn't ready for. The failure broke something in Tesla. He had survived poverty before. He had survived betrayal before. But this was different. This was his ultimate vision, the culmination of everything he had been working toward, and the world had rejected it not because it didn't work but because it worked too well. Because free power threatened the profit model of the electrical utilities that had grown rich on his alternating current system. He had created the industry that now blocked his greatest invention. The isolation that had once been his strength now became his prison. He retreated further into himself, into his obsessions and compulsions. He moved from hotel to hotel, often leaving without paying when his credit ran out. He lived on milk and crackers. He fed pigeons obsessively, spending money he didn't have on their food, talking to them as he had once talked to his motors and generators. The birds, he said, understood him. They didn't mock him. They didn't betray him. They didn't care that his visions were ahead of their time. His appearance became eccentric in ways that the public found disturbing rather than charming. He dressed in clothes decades out of fashion. He refused to shake hands with anyone. He couldn't bear to touch anything round. He washed his hands constantly, compulsively. He counted his steps with such rigid precision that he would walk around blocks multiple times to make the numbers come out right. He ate alone, always at the same table at Delmonico's restaurant until he could no longer afford it, calculating the cubic volume of every piece of food before allowing himself to consume it. The press, which had once celebrated him as a wizard, now portrayed him as a cautionary tale. The mad scientist, the eccentric recluse. He gave interviews where he made increasingly grandiose claims. He had invented a death ray that could destroy 10,000 airplanes at 250 miles distance. He had discovered a new form of energy that would make all current power sources obsolete. He had developed a method of splitting the Earth in half if he chose to. He could communicate with Mars. He could photograph thoughts. Some of these claims may have been true, or at least based on solid theoretical work. Tesla had proven too many times that his impossible ideas were actually possible. But he provided no proofs, no demonstrations, no working models. Just claims. And the world had grown tired of claims. Show us, they said. Prove it. And he couldn't. Either because the technologies required resources he no longer had, or because his aging mind was finally, truly beginning to fracture under the weight of decades of isolation and disappointment. But even in decline, even in poverty, even as the world forgot him, he kept working, kept thinking, kept conceiving of futures that humanity might never reach. He envisioned wireless communication that would connect the entire world. He described something very much like the internet decades before computers existed. He understood that information wanted to flow freely, that humanity's future lay in connection, in the dissolution of barriers between minds. He saw it all. But he was too far ahead. Too isolated. Too strange for anyone to take seriously anymore. Other inventors received credit for his innovations. Marconi won the Nobel Prize for Radio in 1909, using 17 of Tesla's patents. Tesla's patent challenges eventually succeeded, the Supreme Court ruling in his favor in 1943, but by then Marconi was dead, Tesla was dying, and no one cared about the legal vindication. Edison received endless honors and accolades. Universities and institutions that had ignored Tesla fell over themselves to honor the Wizard of Menlo Park. Even Westinghouse, who had believed in Tesla, who had made the fortune that Tesla's sacrifice had enabled, gradually distanced himself from his strange former partner. Tesla's isolation became total. Physical, intellectual, social, financial, emotional. He lived in increasingly cheap hotels. The Waldorf Astoria where he had once resided in luxury became a memory. Then the St. Regis. Then the Governor Clinton. Then the New Yorker Hotel, where he negotiated a permanent room in exchange for a promise that someday, somehow, he would have money again and would pay his debts. They gave him room 3327. He lived there for the last 10 years of his life, alone, poor, forgotten. But the pigeons remembered him. He fed them in Bryant Park every day, rain or shine, blizzard or heat wave. He knew them individually. Named them. He said one particular pigeon, a white female with gray tips on her wings, was the love of his life. More than any human woman. She understood him. When she died, he said something in him died too. The last connection to anything outside his own mind severed. His obsessions intensified. He claimed to be working on revolutionary new inventions, but his notebooks from this period are increasingly chaotic. Brilliant insights mixed with repetitive calculations and strange diagrams that may have been profound or may have been the products of a mind finally fragmenting under the accumulated weight of 80 years of living at intensities normal humans couldn't sustain. The world was at war again. World War II. The ultimate vindication and ultimate condemnation of everything Tesla had enabled. The electrical infrastructure he had created powered both the factories that built weapons and the research facilities that would split the atom. The wireless communications he had pioneered coordinated destruction on global scales. The motors and generators and transformers he had designed made modern warfare possible. The death ray he claimed to have invented, whether real or imaginary, seemed quaint compared to what humanity had actually created. In January 1943, at 86 years old, in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, Nikola Tesla died alone. The maid found him 2 days later. He had left a "Do Not Disturb" sign on his door, and everyone had obeyed. Even in death, his isolation was respected. His body lay undiscovered for 48 hours while the world continued its war, continued using the electrical infrastructure he had created, completely unaware that its creator had just slipped away into whatever darkness lies beyond the darkness. The FBI arrived before the family. They seized his papers, his notebooks, everything. National security, they said. He might have weapon designs, secret technologies, information that could help or harm the war effort. They cataloged everything, classified it, locked it away. Most of it remains classified even now, 80 years later. What secrets did he take to his grave? What inventions remained unrealized in his notebooks? We'll never know. The isolation that defined his life extended even to his legacy. The funeral was small. 2,000 people attended, which sounds like a lot until you remember that this was the man who had electrified the world. The man whose technology powered every light bulb in the city. The man who had made modern civilization possible. 2,000 people. Most of them dignitaries attending out of obligation. How many actually understood what he had given humanity? How many mourned the man rather than perfunctorily honoring the faded memory of a once famous inventor? He was cremated. His ashes were placed in a golden sphere. Fitting perhaps. Contained. Isolated even in death. Eventually they were transported to Belgrade to the Nikola Tesla Museum where they remain. The man who had wanted to give free energy to all humanity, whose vision was global and generous, ended up confined to a sphere you could hold in your hands. The final, cruelest irony of a life defined by cruel ironies. But here's what they couldn't confine. Here's what couldn't be locked away or forgotten or reduced to a sphere of ashes. The impact, the legacy, the transformation. Because while Tesla died alone and forgotten, the world he had created continued. The alternating current system continued powering civilization. The motors continued turning. The lights continued burning. The electrical grid continued expanding, reaching into every corner of the planet, exactly as he had envisioned. And slowly, over the decades after his death, his reputation began to recover. Engineers who actually understood electrical systems recognized what he had contributed. Historians began to untangle the truth from the propaganda of the war of currents. Scientists building on his wireless transmission work acknowledged the foundation he had laid. The Tesla coil became a standard piece of laboratory equipment. His contributions to radio were finally, officially recognized. His patents were studied and marveled at for their insight and elegance. In 1960, the General Conference on Weights and Measures named the unit of magnetic flux density the Tesla. His name became an official part of the scientific lexicon, spoken in laboratories and universities worldwide. Small recognition, perhaps, for a man who had given so much. But recognition nonetheless. Remembrance. And then, in the 21st century, something strange happened. Tesla became cool. A cultural icon. The patron saint of mad scientists and independent inventors. His story resonated with a new generation growing up connected by the internet, that wireless transmission of information that Tesla had envisioned a century earlier. They understood being isolated but connected. They understood seeing possibilities that the mainstream dismissed. They understood the tension between vision and commerce, between what could be and what was profitable. A car company took his name. Electric vehicles bearing the Tesla brand became status symbols. Ironic, perhaps, since Tesla himself never learned to drive and was nearly killed by a taxi in 1937. But appropriate too. The vehicles were powered by electric motors descended directly from his designs, drawing energy from batteries that stored the kind of electrical current he had championed. The company's mission to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy echoed Tesla's own concerns about humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. His face appeared on currency, on stamps, in murals and museums. Books and documentaries and films told his story, often embellished but capturing essential truths. The strange, isolated Serbian immigrant who had changed the world became a symbol of the outsider genius, the visionary ahead of his time, the man who sacrificed everything for his vision. His isolation, once a source of mockery, became part of his mystique. Evidence of the price of genius. Proof that greatness requires suffering, that transformation requires sacrifice, that changing the world means being unable to belong to it. But popularity, even posthumous popularity, doesn't change the facts. Tesla died poor. Died alone. Died with most of his greatest visions unrealized. Died in a world that had taken what it wanted from him and discarded the rest. The fame came too late. The recognition came too late. The understanding came too late. He lived and died in isolation, and no amount of retrospective celebration changes that fundamental tragedy. Yet standing here now, more than 80 years after his death, we can ask, was it worth it? Not for him, obviously. His suffering was real, his loneliness was real, his poverty and isolation and disappointment were all real. But for us, for humanity, for the billions of people who have lived in the light he gave us, was his sacrifice worth our benefit? That's not a question we can answer. That's not a transaction we're entitled to approve. But we can at least acknowledge it. We can at least understand that the comfortable, illuminated, electrified world we inhabit was purchased at a price. That someone paid that price. That Nikola Tesla paid that price. Not willingly, perhaps. Not knowingly. But completely. His isolation was not a bug in the system of genius. It was the system. It was the necessary condition. The crucible where vision was forged. He couldn't connect with people because he was connected to something else, something deeper, the fundamental forces and patterns underlying reality itself. He couldn't belong to his time because he belonged to the future. He couldn't be understood because understanding required perspectives that wouldn't exist for generations. And perhaps that's the real lesson of Tesla's life. Not that genius requires isolation, though often it does. Not that sacrifice is noble, though sometimes it is. But that progress has a human cost. That every great leap forward is powered by individuals who pay prices the rest of us never see. That the light we take for granted casts shadows we prefer to ignore. That behind every convenience, every comfort, every technology we depend on, there are human stories of obsession and sacrifice and isolation and pain. We live in Tesla's world. Every device plugged into a wall. Every light burning in the darkness. Every motor turning, every factory running, every city blazing against the night. All of it traces back to one strange, isolated man who saw what no one else could see and persisted against all reason, against all evidence, against the entire weight of the world telling him he was wrong. He survived isolation not by escaping it but by transforming it into something that transcended his personal suffering. He electrified the world not despite his loneliness but because of it. The same qualities that made him unable to connect with people made him able to connect with forces that most humans couldn't perceive. His strangeness was his strength. His obsessions were his tools. His isolation was his forge. And in the end, that's what it means to be human at the highest level. To suffer and create meaning from that suffering. To be alone and transform that aloneness into connection for others. To be misunderstood and persist in your truth until finally, inevitably, the world catches up. To sacrifice everything not for reward or recognition but because the vision demands it, because the work requires it, because you cannot be anything other than what you are. Nikola Tesla was what he was. Strange, brilliant, isolated, obsessed, ahead of his time. Unable to compromise, unable to belong, unable to stop seeing possibilities that others dismissed as impossible. And because he was what he was, because he survived the isolation that would have destroyed anyone else, because he transformed his loneliness into genius and his genius into light, we live in a world transformed. Every light that burns is his monument. Every motor that turns is his legacy. Every electron flowing through the grid is his gift. Not given freely, not given joyfully, but given completely. Given at a cost we can never fully repay. That's the real story. Not triumph, not vindication, not fame or fortune or happy endings, but transformation. The transformation of one man's isolation into civilization's illumination. The conversion of suffering into service. The alchemy of turning darkness into light, not metaphorically but literally, actually, completely. Nikola Tesla survived isolation to electrify the world. And in doing so, he showed us what human beings are capable of when they refuse to accept limitations, when they persist despite isolation, when they transform personal darkness into light for everyone else. Not because it made them happy, not because it made them rich, not because it gave them what they needed, but because they saw what needed to be done and they did it regardless of cost. That's heroism, not the Hollywood kind. Not the kind with happy endings and recognition and reward, but the real kind. The kind that costs everything and gives everything and asks nothing in return except that we remember, that we understand, that we honor the sacrifice by living in the light it created. Turn on a light, any light, and remember that it came at a price, that someone paid that price. That isolation, properly transformed, properly endured, properly sacrificed, can illuminate the entire world. That's Tesla's legacy. Not comfort, not connection, not belonging, but light. Actual, literal, physical light, burning in the darkness, powered by a system conceived in isolation, brought into existence through sacrifice, and given to humanity by a man who asked for almost nothing and received even less. We are all living in Nikola Tesla's long shadow, the shadow cast by the light he gave us. And perhaps the least we can do, the very least, is pause sometimes in that light and remember the man who lived in darkness so that we wouldn't have to. That's what it means to survive isolation. To endure it, to use it, to transform it into something that outlasts you, that serves others, that changes everything. Not for glory, not for reward, but because you saw what needed to be done, and you were the only one who could do it, and so you did it, alone, isolated, misunderstood, but ultimately, impossibly, triumphantly successful. Nikola Tesla survived isolation to electrify the world. And the world, for all its ingratitude, for all its cruelty, for all its failure to recognize what it had been given, remains illuminated still. Every light that burns is proof. Every motor that turns is evidence. Every electron flowing through the grid is testimony. He survived. He transformed. He illuminated. And the light remains. But there's another dimension to Tesla's isolation that we must confront, one that speaks directly to our contemporary moment. Because we live in an age that paradoxically celebrates connection while experiencing epidemic levels of loneliness. We carry devices that can connect us to billions of people instantly, devices powered by the electrical infrastructure Tesla created, yet we feel more isolated than ever. We have conquered physical darkness with his light, but we struggle with darkness of another kind. The darkness of disconnection in an age of connection. The isolation of being surrounded by people but understood by none. Tesla's story asks uncomfortable questions about this modern condition. Was his isolation a failure of society or a necessary condition of his genius? Should we have found ways to include him, to make him belong, to give him the human connection he clearly needed? Or would that have diminished the very qualities that made his contributions possible? These aren't abstract questions. They're urgent ones. Because right now, in laboratories and workshops and bedrooms around the world, there are people like Tesla. Strange. Obsessed. Unable to fit in. Seeing possibilities that others dismiss. Are we recognizing them? Supporting them? Or are we, like Tesla's contemporaries, too busy with the practical and profitable to notice the visionary and revolutionary? Consider the pattern that keeps repeating throughout history. The outsider sees something no one else can see. The outsider pursues it obsessively, often at great personal cost. The outsider is mocked, dismissed, marginalized. And then, years or decades or centuries later, we recognize that the outsider was right. We build monuments. We name units of measurement. We put faces on currency. But by then it's too late. The person who actually did the work, who paid the price, who sacrificed everything, is dead. Gone. Beyond our recognition and our gratitude. This pattern is not inevitable. It's a choice. A societal choice. We could choose to recognize genius while it's alive. To support visionaries before they prove themselves. To create structures that nurture radical innovation rather than marginalizing it. But that would require risk. It would require betting on people who seem crazy. It would require accepting that strangeness might be a feature, not a bug. That isolation might indicate connection to something we can't perceive. That the person everyone considers mad might be the only one who sees clearly. Tesla forces us to ask, how many potential Teslas have we lost? How many brilliant, strange, isolated individuals have we dismissed or ignored or allowed to suffer in poverty because they couldn't conform, couldn't explain their visions in ways we could immediately understand, couldn't package their genius in commercially viable forms? How much darker would our world be if Tesla himself had given up during those 2 years digging ditches? What if he had died then, unknown, his visions unrealized? We came that close to losing everything he gave us. One fever, one accident, one moment of despair too deep to overcome, and the 20th century would have unfolded very differently. This thought should terrify us, because it means our progress is more fragile than we like to believe. It depends on individuals who are, by definition, rare and strange and difficult. It depends on society's willingness to tolerate and support them even when we don't understand them. It depends on luck and timing and the kindness of people like Nikola Tesla who protect strange children, or friends like Antal Sijidi who insist on walks in the park, or investors like George Westinghouse who believe in impossible ideas. And here's the cruel mathematics. We need the Teslas, but the Teslas don't need us. Or rather, they need us, but they're capable of persisting without us, surviving isolation, transforming suffering into creation. We're the ones who benefit. We're the ones who get the light and the power and the transformed civilization. They're the ones who pay the price. That transaction is fundamentally unfair, fundamentally exploitative. And we don't even have the decency to properly compensate them while they're alive to enjoy it. The modern world has not solved this problem. If anything, we've made it worse. We've created systems that are very good at recognizing and rewarding incremental improvements to existing technologies but very bad at nurturing truly revolutionary innovations. We fund what makes sense, what has clear commercial applications, what can be explained in elevator pitches to investors. We don't fund the weird, the strange, the decades-long obsessive pursuits of isolated individuals chasing visions they can barely articulate. And yet those weird obsessive pursuits are where the real breakthroughs come from. Not from committees. Not from well-funded corporate research labs working on quarterly objectives. But from individuals willing to sacrifice everything, to persist in isolation, to see what others can't see. Tesla proved this. Einstein proved this. Every major revolution in human capability has been sparked by individuals who were, by conventional measures, strange and impractical and poorly suited to their times. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we honor Tesla's legacy not just by using his inventions but by learning from his story? Perhaps we start by changing how we think about isolation and strangeness. Perhaps we stop treating them purely as problems to be solved, conditions to be cured, and start recognizing that sometimes they're symptoms of minds operating at frequencies most of us can't perceive. Perhaps we create better support structures for the strange and obsessed, not to make them normal but to help them survive long enough to gift us their visions. Perhaps we accept that progress has costs, and those costs are often borne by individuals we'll never properly compensate. Perhaps we at least acknowledge this debt. Perhaps we treat the strange, isolated, obsessed individuals we encounter with more respect, more patience, more willingness to believe that they might be seeing something real even when we can't see it ourselves. Perhaps we remember that the person everyone considers crazy might be a Tesla, and dismissing them might mean losing the next revolution in human capability. But we also need to grapple with the ethical dimensions of celebrating isolation, because there's a danger in romanticizing suffering, in treating Tesla's loneliness as necessary rather than tragic, in suggesting that genius requires pain or that we shouldn't try to help because isolation is productive. That's nonsense. That's dangerous nonsense. Tesla suffered. His isolation hurt him. The fact that he transformed that suffering into something valuable for humanity doesn't make the suffering good. It makes it tragic in the classical sense, a terrible waste of human potential for connection and happiness that happened to produce something valuable despite itself, not because of itself. We should honor Tesla by using his light and also by learning from his darkness. By building a world that recognizes genius before it breaks the genius. By supporting the strange and obsessed not because we expect them to pay us back with inventions but because they're human beings deserving of support. By creating conditions where visionaries can flourish without having to sacrifice everything, where innovation doesn't require self-destruction, where you can change the world and also have a life worth living. This is possible. It's not inevitable that genius requires suffering. That's just the pattern we've established, the system we've built. But systems can change. We change from direct current to alternating current. We can change from a system that exploits visionaries to one that nurtures them. From a culture that celebrates genius posthumously to one that supports it while alive. From a society that profits from Tesla's sacrifice to one that learns from it. Consider what the world would look like if we had truly valued Tesla. If we had given him the resources to build Wardenclyffe completely. If we had implemented his wireless power transmission. If we had listened to his ideas about renewable energy and sustainable development. If we had created social structures that allowed his genius to flourish without requiring his isolation and suffering. What technologies might we have now? What problems might already be solved? What revolutions in human capability might we be experiencing instead of imagining? We can't change Tesla's story, but we can change how we respond to the Teslas of our own time. We can choose to recognize genius while it lives, to support vision before it proves itself, to value strangeness as potentially valuable rather than automatically dismissing it, to create a world where you don't have to suffer in isolation to change civilization, where sacrifice is honored but not required, where the transaction between visionary and society is less exploitative and more reciprocal. This is Tesla's challenge to us. Not just to use his inventions, not just to honor his memory, but to learn from his suffering, to build better systems, to become a civilization worthy of its visionaries, to stop requiring that our greatest minds pay prices we would never pay ourselves in exchange for advances we all benefit from, to recognize that every light burning in the darkness represents not just an invention but a human story, often a tragic one, and that we have a responsibility to make those stories less tragic going forward. Because here's the truth we need to face: we're still doing it. Right now. Today. There are people like Tesla, strange and isolated and obsessed with visions we don't understand, and we're ignoring them or dismissing them or allowing them to suffer in poverty while they try to birth the future. We haven't learned. We're still making the same mistakes. We're still taking the gifts and forgetting the givers. We're still building our civilization on the suffering of individuals we fail to properly value. The light Tesla gave us illuminates this failure. Every time we flip a switch, we should remember not just that someone made this possible but that someone suffered to make this possible, and that suffering was not necessary, not inevitable, not acceptable. Was a failure. Our failure. Civilization's failure. And it continues every time we encounter genius and dismiss it, every time we meet strangeness and marginalize it, every time we demand that visionaries prove themselves according to our limited understanding before we'll support them. Tesla's isolation electrified the world. But it didn't have to be that way. His genius could have been nurtured, supported, celebrated while he lived. His final years could have been spent in comfort and recognition rather than poverty and pigeons. His revolutionary visions could have been funded and implemented rather than dismissed and forgotten. The light could have come without the darkness. The transformation could have happened without the tragedy. That it didn't is on us. On the society that took and took and took and gave back almost nothing. On the systems that reward the conventional and marginalize the revolutionary. On the culture that celebrates dead geniuses while ignoring living ones. On every person who encounters strangeness and responds with mockery rather than curiosity, with dismissal rather than support, with exploitation rather than reciprocity. We are all complicit. We are all beneficiaries of Tesla's sacrifice. We are all responsible for ensuring that the next Tesla, the next visionary, the next strange isolated genius who sees what we cannot see, is treated better than we treated this one. That their isolation is supported rather than enforced. That their strangeness is nurtured rather than punished. That their suffering is minimized rather than romanticized. That their genius is recognized and rewarded while they live to enjoy it. This is what it means to truly honor Tesla's legacy. Not monuments. Not museums. Not naming electric cars after him. But building a world that treats its visionaries better than we treated him. A world where isolation is a choice rather than a requirement. Where genius can flourish without requiring self-destruction. Where the price of changing civilization is not the complete sacrifice of the changer. We owe Tesla more than gratitude. We owe him transformation. Not just the transformation he gave us, light for darkness, power for limitation, connection for isolation, but the transformation of ourselves, of our systems, of our culture, of how we recognize and support and honor those rare individuals capable of seeing the future and making it real. Every light that burns is a reminder, not just of what he gave us, but of what we failed to give him. Not just of his triumph, but of our failure. Not just of his genius, but of our blindness. Not just of his gift, but of our debt. And that debt remains unpaid. Will remain unpaid until we learn, until we change, until we build a civilization that deserves its visionaries instead of one that exploits them. Until we recognize that the light we take for granted was purchased at a price we never should have asked anyone to pay. Tesla survived isolation to electrify the world. But he shouldn't have had to survive isolation. Shouldn't have had to sacrifice everything. Shouldn't have died poor and alone and forgotten. That's not heroic. That's tragic. And the tragedy is ours, not his. He did everything right. We did everything wrong. And we're still doing it. Still making the same mistakes. Still failing the visionaries who see what we cannot see. The light remains, but so does the darkness of our failure. And both together form Tesla's complete legacy. The gift and the lesson. The transformation and the warning. The illumination and the shadow. All of it together, inseparable, demanding that we do better, become worthy of the gifts we've been given by those we failed to properly value. But let us return in these final moments to the man himself. Not the icon. Not the symbol. Not the unit of measurement or the face on currency or the name on electric cars. But the actual human being. Nikola Tesla. Born during a lightning storm. Died alone in a hotel room. The person, not the legend. Because that's who paid the price. That's who suffered the isolation. That's who transformed darkness into light while living in both. Picture him in his final years. Walking to Bryant Park every day at precisely the same time, his steps counted with obsessive precision, his path never varying. Feeding the pigeons. Talking to them softly in Serbian, the language of his childhood, the language of his mother who had understood him when no one else could. His hands, once steady enough to wind coils and adjust instruments with microscopic precision, now trembling slightly. His eyes, which had seen visions of rotating magnetic fields and wireless power transmission and futures we still haven't reached, now focused on birds who depended on him the way humanity depended on his inventions, unconsciously, taking for granted what they could never understand. He was alone. Completely alone. But was he lonely? That's a different question. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted isolation. But Tesla had long since stopped wanting what he couldn't have. He had made peace with his strangeness, with his inability to connect in conventional ways, with his obsessions and compulsions and the fundamental architecture of his mind that separated him from others. He had the pigeons. He had his thoughts. He had his memories of Budapest and Paris and the triumph of Niagara Falls. He had the satisfaction, perhaps, of knowing that his vision had been proven correct, that the world ran on his system, even if the world had forgotten who created it. Or perhaps that's romantic nonsense. Perhaps he was desperately lonely. Perhaps every day was agony, the isolation not accepted but endured, survived but never conquered. Perhaps he lay awake in room 3327 counting ceiling tiles, his mind still racing with visions he lacked the resources to implement, and felt the crushing weight of being the only person who could see certain truths, the terrible burden of genius unrecognized, of sacrifice unrewarded, of a life spent giving everything and receiving almost nothing. We don't know. Can't know. Tesla kept his internal experience private. But we can know this, he persisted. Every day until the very last day he persisted. He got up. He fed the pigeons. He worked on his notebooks. He maintained his rituals and routines even when they must have seemed pointless, even when no one was watching, even when he had every reason to give up. That persistence, that refusal to surrender even when surrender would have been understandable, that's heroism of a kind we rarely recognize. Because we celebrate the dramatic moments. The vision in Budapest. The victory at Niagara Falls. The demonstrations that amazed audiences. But the real heroism is quieter. It's getting up every day when you're old and poor and forgotten. It's maintaining your dignity when the world has dismissed you. It's continuing to think and create and dream when no one cares about your thoughts or creations or dreams anymore. It's surviving not the dramatic isolation of obsessive genius but the mundane isolation of being old and strange and irrelevant in a world that has moved on. Tesla did that. For years. For the entire last decade of his life. He maintained his standards. Dressed as well as his poverty allowed. Kept himself clean despite his compulsive hand-washing. Paid his debts when he could. Treated the hotel staff with courtesy. Fed the pigeons. He didn't become bitter, or if he did, he didn't inflict that bitterness on others. He remained, to the end, the strange but dignified Serbian gentleman with the impossible visions and the peculiar habits and the brilliant mind that had changed everything. And then one night, in January 1943, while the world tore itself apart in the most destructive war in human history, powered in part by the electrical infrastructure he had created, his heart simply stopped. No drama. No final words. No deathbed revelations. Just the quiet cessation of a consciousness that had burned more brightly than most, seen more clearly than most, contributed more significantly than most, and suffered more completely than most. The strange lights in his brain, the visions and calculations and dreams, all extinguished in an instant. The isolation that had defined his life becoming absolute and final. 2 days later they found him. The world's greatest electrical engineer, dead in the dark, alone. The man who had conquered darkness for humanity, dying in it. The irony is almost too perfect, too poetic. But irony doesn't capture it. Tragedy doesn't capture it. No single word captures the complex reality of a life so brilliant and so painful, so contributory and so unrewarded, so transformative and so isolated. What do we do with this? How do we hold all of it together? The gift and the cost. The light and the darkness. The triumph and the tragedy. The transformation of civilization and the destruction of the transformer. How do we honor both what Tesla gave us and what we failed to give him? How do we celebrate his genius without romanticizing his suffering? How do we learn from his sacrifice without requiring it from others? Perhaps we start by telling the complete story. Not just the victories but the defeats. Not just the vision but the cost of vision. Not just the alternating current but the man who conceived it, built it, sacrificed for it, and died having given it to a world that took it for granted. We tell the truth. All of it. The inspiring parts and the heartbreaking parts. The moments of triumph and the decades of isolation. The revolutionary inventions and the pigeons in Bryant Park. All of it together, inseparable, the complete picture of what genius actually looks like when it intersects with the limitations of human society. We tell the story not to make people feel guilty, though perhaps some guilt is warranted. We tell it to illuminate, to help us see clearly what we otherwise miss. To understand that behind every convenience we enjoy, there are human stories. Behind every technology we depend on, there are sacrifices we never acknowledge. Behind every light burning in the darkness, there is darkness of another kind, the darkness of isolation and suffering and sacrifice that made that light possible. And having seen clearly, having understood completely, we make different choices. We recognize genius when it appears, even when it appears strange. We support visionaries before they prove themselves, not just after. We create systems that nurture rather than exploit, that reward rather than discard, that honor while alive rather than posthumously. We build a civilization worthy of its greatest minds instead of one that uses them up and throws them away. This is what Tesla's story demands of us. Not worship, not monuments, but transformation. The same kind of transformation he gave us, from darkness to light, from limitation to possibility, from what is to what could be. He showed us how to transform the world. Now we must show him, retroactively, futilely but sincerely, that we learned, that we changed, that his suffering, while terrible, while unnecessary, while something that should never have happened, at least taught us to prevent it from happening to others. Every light that burns tonight as you listen to these words, as you consider this story, is Tesla's. Every device drawing power from a wall socket, every motor turning, every city blazing against the darkness, all of it traces back to one man. One strange, brilliant, isolated man who saw what no one else could see and persisted until the world caught up, at terrible cost to himself, at incalculable benefit to everyone else. That transaction was unfair, exploitative, wrong. And it's still happening. Right now, somewhere there's another Tesla. Another strange, isolated, brilliant person seeing what we cannot see, struggling alone, suffering unnecessarily. And we're failing them just like we failed Tesla. Taking if they happen to break through. Ignoring if they don't. Never properly valuing. Never adequately supporting. Never truly honoring while it matters, while they're alive to experience it. The light Tesla gave us should illuminate this failure. Should help us see what we're doing wrong. Should motivate us to change, to do better, to become a civilization that deserves its visionaries instead of one that exploits them. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. Not just the inventions but the warning. Not just the triumph but the tragedy. Not just the light but the darkness that purchased it. We are all living in Tesla's world. Every moment of every day. His vision surrounds us, powers us, enables the life we live. We owe him everything. We gave him almost nothing. That debt cannot be repaid, but it can be acknowledged. And having acknowledged it, we can commit to doing better. To being better. To building a world where genius doesn't require self-destruction, where vision doesn't demand isolation, where changing civilization doesn't cost the changer everything. Nikola Tesla survived isolation to electrify the world. But he shouldn't have had to survive it alone. And the next Tesla, whoever they are, wherever they are, whatever impossible thing they're seeing that we can't yet imagine, they shouldn't have to either. That's what we owe. Not to the dead who are beyond our help, but to the living, to the future, to the next strange, brilliant, isolated individual who will see what we cannot see and give us what we don't yet know we need. The light remains. Tesla's gift. Eternal, or as eternal as human civilization itself. Every photon illuminating the darkness is testimony. Every electron flowing through the grid is evidence. Every motor turning, every device operating, every city blazing against the night, all of it proves that one person, properly supported or impossibly persistent despite lacking support, can change everything. That's the hope in the tragedy. That's the light in the darkness. That transformation is possible. That individuals matter. That seeing clearly and persisting obstinately and sacrificing completely can actually, literally, demonstrably change the world. Tesla proved it, paid the price for proving it, and left us both the gift and the challenge. Use the light. Learn from the darkness. Honor both. And build a world where the next person who sees the impossible and makes it real doesn't have to sacrifice everything, doesn't have to die alone and poor and forgotten, doesn't have to suffer isolation as the price of illumination. That's what Tesla's story means. That's what his life teaches. That's what his sacrifice demands. Not that we remember him, though we should, but that we change, that we learn, that we become worthy of the gifts we've been given by those we failed to properly value. The light burns. Testimony and challenge. Gift and warning. Illumination and shadow. All of it together, inseparable, demanding that we see clearly, understand completely, and choose differently. And in the center of that light, casting that long shadow, stands a man. Alone. Strange. Brilliant. Isolated. Nikola Tesla. Who survived what would destroy most people. who transformed suffering into service, who gave everything and asked for almost nothing, who changed the world completely while belonging to it hardly at all. He is gone. The light remains. And that light, if we let it, can illuminate not just our homes and our cities but our choices, our values, our responsibilities to those rare souls who see what we cannot see and give us futures we cannot imagine. Stand in Tesla's light. And remember the darkness that made it possible. Remember the man. Remember the cost. Remember the lesson. And choose to do better. To be better. To build a world where light doesn't require such darkness, where genius doesn't require such suffering, where the next person who sees the impossible and makes it real is honored and supported and valued while they live to experience it. That's Tesla's final gift. Not just the light itself, but the understanding of what that light cost. And the challenge to ensure that the next light, the next vision, the next transformation, comes at a lower price to the transformer. The story ends. But the light continues. And in that continuing light, in every burning bulb and turning motor and power device, Tesla persists. Not as he was alone in suffering, but as he deserves to be remembered. The man who survived isolation to electrify the world. The man who transformed darkness into light. The man who gave us everything while we gave him almost nothing. His isolation electrified the world. And the world remains electric still. Remember, learn, change. The light is waiting to show you the way.